What happened on the fateful night before Siddhartha Gautama became Buddha? Welcome back, everyone, to Mind Podcast. In 623 BC, on the full moon day of the 4th lunar month, in the Lumbini Garden of ancient India, now located in Nepal near the foothills of the Himalayas, Queen Maya, wife of King Suddhodana from the noble Shakya clan of the Gautama family, gave birth to a prince. The news of the prince's birth spread among the people, bringing joy to everyone. The king invited several sages to examine the prince's appearance. They all concluded that the prince possessed 32 auspicious marks never before seen on anyone. They foretold that if he became a king, he would be a wise and virtuous emperor, and if he pursued the path of asceticism, he would become a great sage, an extraordinary figure. Thus, the king named the prince Siddhartha, which means wish fulfilled. The king also proclaimed that Siddhartha would succeed him and be known as Crown Prince Siddhartha. The Crown Prince grew stronger and more handsome each year, with remarkable development. He possessed not only robust health, but also exceptional intelligence, excelling in both literature and martial arts. Although his abilities surpassed others, the prince never displayed arrogance or disdain. Instead, he maintained a gentle demeanor, showing compassion and equality towards all beings. One day, during the plowing festival, the prince accompanied his father to the fields. While everyone enjoyed the festival amidst the warm spring sun, with flowers blooming and birds singing in a scene of peace and prosperity, the prince sat alone, cross-legged in meditation under a tree. He thought to himself that the outward beauty of the world was not the true reality, as the oxen had to laboriously pull the plow, and the farmers toiled under the hot sun, covered in sweat and dirt just to earn food and clothing. Lost in these thoughts, the prince entered a state of deep meditation. Time flew by and the prince turned 16. He had completed all his studies and training. The king, wanting his son to succeed him, arranged for the prince to marry the beautiful and virtuous Princess Yasodhara. The luxurious life with a gentle and loving wife seemed perfect, and everyone thought the prince would continue to live in such comfort, eventually taking over the throne to govern the country. Later, the princess gave birth to a son named Rahula, which brought even more joy to King Suddhodana. However, despite all the happiness surrounding him, the prince felt a deep and troubling sense of unease. He was curious about what life was like beyond the palace walls. One day, the prince asked the king for permission to go outside the city gates to see the world. At the eastern gate, he saw an old man with white hair, a hunched back, and missing teeth, walking with great difficulty. At the southern gate, he saw a man lying on the grass, writhing in pain, and upon inquiry, learned that this person was suffering from illness. At the western gate, he encountered a dead person lying on the side of the road. Witnessing these three tragic scenes, the prince realized the nature of suffering in life and wanted to find a way to save all beings from suffering, illness, and death, but he did not yet know how. A few days later, the prince again requested to go outside. This time, at the northern gate, he saw a man sitting in meditation under a tree, completely undisturbed by the people passing by. Seeing this, the prince felt a deep admiration, and within his heart conceived the idea of finding a way to end suffering, illness, and death. He returned to the palace and presented his wish to leave the household and practice asceticism to the king, but his request was denied. The prince then posed 4 questions to the king, saying he would abandon the idea of renunciation if the king could solve them. 1. How can everyone stay young forever and never age? 2. How can everyone stay healthy forever and never become ill? 3. How can everyone live forever and never die? 4. How can everyone be free from suffering? The king listened to the questions but could not provide any solutions. He acknowledged that aging, illness, suffering, and death are natural parts of life, and that there was no way to solve them. One must simply accept them as inevitable. After witnessing the 4 sights at the 4 gates of the city, the prince realized that the solution lies in understanding that life is suffering. Everything is temporary. Even our own bodies will one day turn to dust. He knew he must seek the truth to save himself and all sentient beings. The prince made up his mind to search for the path of liberation. The opulence of the palace, the riches, the beautiful wife, the loving son, all of it could not compare to the great liberation and the goal of freeing sentient beings from suffering. One night, Prince Siddhartha looked at his wife and son as they slept, and then, accompanied by his horsekeeper, he silently left the palace in the darkness of the night. He was 29 years old at the time, abandoning everything in pursuit of the path to enlightenment, armed with nothing but his own 2 hands. What lay ahead of him was uncertain. After crossing the Anoma River, the prince used his sword to cut off his hair and gave his robes, crown, and sword to his horsekeeper to bring back to the king. He donned a simple yellow-orange cloth, voluntarily living the life of a monk, and accepted all material hardships. From living a luxurious and princely life, he suddenly became a wanderer, enduring heat and cold like a homeless person, exposed to the elements, with no house or shelter. He made the shade of trees and the refuge of caves his home, seeking protection from the sun and rain. He braved storms and used his bowl to beg for food to sustain himself. He first sought to learn from the sage Alara Kalama, but was not satisfied with the teachings he received. He then went to study under another sage, Uddaka Ramaputta, but the attainments there still did not resolve what he sought. They were not the ultimate truth, nor did they lead to supreme nirvana. So, the prince moved on once again. He ventured to the outskirts of the city of Rajagaha in the kingdom of Magadha, where he practiced on his own. At that time, there was a sage named Kaundinya, whom King Suddhodana had invited to predict the prince's future when he was born. Hearing that the prince had renounced the world to seek the path of enlightenment, Kaundinya, along with 4 other ascetics, sought him out. Back then, many believed that only through extreme asceticism could one achieve liberation. Kaundinya persuaded the prince to practice this path. From having a strong and robust body, the prince gradually became emaciated, with only skin covering his bones. He used many methods of asceticism, including eating only wild herbs and fasting while meditating, even holding his breath as part of his practice. After a long period of intense self-mortification, death seemed near. Yet no signs of truth or enlightenment were found. His mind was weakened and his spirit exhausted. The prince firmly decided to abandon this path of extreme asceticism, realizing that a healthy body and a clear mind were necessary to contemplate and realize the truth. He began consuming simple plants again, but he did not revert to a life of indulgence. Instead, he laid out the path of the middle way. The prince understood that practicing the middle way would cultivate wisdom, which in turn would bring about freedom of the mind, leading to enlightenment. The 5 fellow ascetics criticized Siddhartha Gautama for lacking patience and immediately left him. The prince thought, "I have searched everywhere, yet no one has the capacity to guide me to achieve the goal I desire, because no one has yet emerged from ignorance." He then went to the foot of the Bodhi tree, using grass as a meditation seat, and vowed, "If I do not attain the truth, even if my flesh and bones are crushed, I will not leave this place." He faced countless internal challenges, such as desire, anger, ignorance, pride, and doubt. Additionally, he had to confront external forces like Mara, the demon of temptation, who used all kinds of devious tricks to hinder his meditation. In the end, he triumphed over both his inner and outer struggles, bringing his mind into peaceful concentration. On the 49th night of meditation, he attained the knowledge of past lives. He could see all his previous lives, from 1, 2, 3 lives, to 10, 100, 1,000 lives. He knew where he was born, what his life was like, and where he was reborn after death. He understood everything. Continuing to meditate until midnight, he attained the divine eye, gaining insight into the entire cosmos and the nature of its formation, existence, destruction, and rebirth. He saw how worlds were created, sustained, decayed, and disappeared, comprehending the entire process. Still deeply absorbed in meditation until around 2 a.m., he attained the knowledge of the extinction of all impurities. He eradicated all defilements and realized the source of suffering, Enrei, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to the complete eradication of suffering. He knew that he had been liberated, no longer subject to rebirth. His spiritual cultivation was complete, the work was done, and he would not return to his previous state. Slowly opening his eyes, he saw the morning star shining brightly in the sky, and he experienced full enlightenment, completely understanding the universal truth and possessing supreme wisdom. He attained the highest and perfect enlightenment, and thus became known as the fully awakened one, the Buddha, with the title of Shakyamuni Buddha. After attaining enlightenment, the Buddha observed the universe and saw countless worlds. He looked upon sentient beings and realized that each being possesses Buddha nature, but they are submerged in darkness and ignorance, drifting in the ocean of birth and death, unable to escape the cycle of samsara. The Buddha knew that if he revealed the Dharma, some people would be able to endure the practice and understand it. Therefore, he decided to teach and guide sentient beings, regardless of how difficult it might be, because it was his duty as a Buddha, just as all the Buddhas in the universe have done, are doing, and will do, to lead beings out of suffering and into liberation. The Buddha's propagation of the Dharma was based on 3 principles. First, the Buddha thought of teaching virtuous and knowledgeable people who were not deeply tainted by worldly defilements. He recalled Alara Kalama, the first sage he had sought guidance from. Using his divine eye, he saw that Alara Kalama had passed away 7 days prior. Next, the Buddha thought of Uddaka Ramaputa, the second sage he had learned from. Again, using his Buddha vision, he saw that Uddaka Ramaputa had just passed away the day before. The Buddha then remembered the 5 fellow ascetics with whom he had practiced severe asceticism. He went to the deer park in Sarnath to meet them. Initially, the 5 ascetics doubted the Buddha and criticized his way of life. The Buddha had to explain to them 3 times that his intention was not to return to a life of indulgence. He merely sought to maintain a body strong enough to endure firm meditation practice. This was the middle way that needed to be followed. The Buddha stated, "Now I have attained the path and achieved the deathless, unborn, and unconditioned state. If anyone follows the path as I have taught, they too will realize this truth. Moreover, if I had not known where you were, how could I have found you here? Furthermore, I have never spoken these words to you before, so now you can understand." At that time, the 5 ascetics gave up their practice of extreme asceticism and followed the Buddha's teachings. His first sermon was on the 4 noble truths. Birth, aging, illness, and death cause suffering. To end suffering, one must find its cause, which is rooted in greed, anger, and ignorance. The cessation of suffering is achieved through the Noble Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Gradually, all 5 of the ascetics attained sainthood, with the first to attain the level of arahant, being Kaundinya. At that time in India, besides the belief in asceticism as a path to enlightenment, there were also views that when a person dies, the soul and body vanish entirely and nothing remains. Some believed in living a life of indulgence, enjoying all the pleasures of the world without concern for morality, as they thought that pleasure was the only reality. They believed there was no need to control desires, no karma, no rebirth, and no consequences of good or evil deeds. Everything was just a natural instinct of the strong overcoming the weak. Thus, the Buddha had to confront these misconceptions. After gaining his first 5 disciples, the Buddha converted 55 Brahmins, with Upatissa, later known as Sariputta, as the leader. These people, along with the original 5, formed a group of 60, thereby establishing the Sangha, the monastic community. From this point forward, the Buddha taught the 4 noble truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. Upatissa's parents and wife were the first lay devotees of the Buddha. Within 3 months, all 60 of these initial disciples firmly adhered to the precepts and attained arahantship. The Buddha instructed them to spread the Dharma to various places, while he himself headed south to Uruvela to convert the fire-worshipping sect led by Uruvela Kassapa. Uruvela Kassapa, along with his 500 disciples, requested ordination from the Buddha. Kassapa had 2 younger brothers, Nadi Kassapa, who had 300 disciples, and Gaya Kassapa, who had 200 disciples. Upon seeing their elder brother follow the Buddha, they also joined, bringing their disciples along. The Buddha then delivered a sermon to these 1,000 disciples, discussing the 6 senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind, being engulfed in the flames of desire, anger, and ignorance, leading to birth, aging, illness, death, sorrow, suffering, and despair. He encouraged them to contemplate the impermanence of forms, sounds, scents, tastes, and touches, and to detach themselves from sensory attachment. With resolute practice, they all attained sainthood. After ordaining over 1,000 disciples, the Buddha went to the kingdom of Magadha to fulfill his promise to King Bimbisara that he would return after attaining enlightenment. When the king learned that the Buddha had achieved enlightenment, he was overjoyed and made offerings to the Buddha and the Sangha at the Bamboo Grove Monastery, Veluvana. During this time, Sariputta and Moggallana, who were seekers of truth, came across many teachers but were not satisfied. One day, Sariputta saw a monk begging for alms in the city of Rajagaha, radiating the demeanor of a noble sage. Sariputta approached the monk, whose name was Assaji, and engaged him in conversation. From Assaji, Sariputta learned that everything arises due to conditions, and the Tathagata, Buddha, elucidates the origin of these conditions and the path to their cessation. Hearing these words, Sariputta felt his mind awaken with wisdom. He further inquired and learned that the great sage was residing at the bamboo grove. Sariputta then went to inform Moggallana of his newfound understanding. Moggallana, upon hearing the teachings, also experienced profound clarity. Together, they led a group of friends to the bamboo grove to request ordination from the Buddha. Within a few days, both Sariputta and Moggallana attained arahantship. The Buddha acknowledged them as the foremost among his disciples. Later, the Buddha met the wealthy merchant Anathapindika, the richest man in Savatthi. Moved by the Buddha's teachings, Anathapindika made a grand vow to build a monastery in the northern part of India to offer to the Buddha and the Sangha. Around that time, King Suddhodana, upon hearing that the Buddha had attained enlightenment, sent messengers 10 times to invite the Buddha back to Kapilavastu. Each time, the messengers, upon meeting the Buddha and hearing his teachings, requested ordination and stayed to practice without returning. Finally, the 10th messenger, Kaludai, stayed to practice but remembered the king's words. After attaining enlightenment, he requested the Buddha to return to visit his father. On his journey back to his birthplace, Kapilavastu, the Buddha taught and enlightened everyone he met along the way. When he arrived at Kapilavastu, he stayed for 7 days, during which he taught and converted the entire royal family. Many members of the royal family followed him and renounced the world to practice the Dharma, including Nanda, Ananda, Anuruddha, and his own son, Rahula, who was only 7 years old at the time. Throughout his life of spreading the Dharma, the Buddha did not always encounter smooth sailing. There were times when he had to face challenges and opposition. This opposition often came from teachers of other sects, false doctrines, superstitions, or even from those who sought to compete with him. However, the Buddha resolved all such situations calmly. For example, on one occasion, a Brahmin insulted the Buddha with harsh words. The Buddha remained silent and did not respond. After a long time of receiving no reaction, the man asked, "Why don't you reply when I insult you?" The Buddha responded, "If you offer a gift to someone and that person does not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man replied, "The gift belongs to me." The Buddha then said, "Likewise, I do not accept your insults, so they belong to you." Hearing this, the man stopped insulting the Buddha. In a similar incident, the Buddha replied differently, saying that harsh words are like spitting against the wind. The spit only ends up falling back on the face of the person who spits. Another time, the daughter of a non-believer came forward, pretending to be pregnant, and accused the Buddha in front of everyone, claiming that the unborn child was his and demanded he take responsibility. The Buddha remained silent and used his miraculous powers to cause the fake belly to fall off, revealing the truth. The crowd laughed, and the girl, feeling humiliated, left in shame and did not dare to look back. In the 20th year of the Buddha's ministry, he encountered Angulimala, a notorious criminal who had severed 999 fingers from 999 people. Using his miraculous powers, the Buddha made it so that Angulimala could not catch up to him, despite running to the point of exhaustion. Angulimala finally shouted, "Monk, stop!" The Buddha replied, "I have long since stopped, but you have yet to stop." Angulimala said, "I have already stopped. Why do you say that I have not?" The Buddha responded, "The Tathagata has stopped. He no longer harms any living being. You, however, continue to kill your fellow humans with blood-stained hands. Thus I have stopped, but you have not." Right then and there, Angulimala threw away all his weapons, approached the Buddha, knelt down and requested to be accepted as a disciple. The Buddha consented, and Angulimala practiced diligently and soon attained arahantship. Another event involved Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, who tried to usurp leadership of the Sangha. Driven by ambition, Devadatta committed many wrongful acts against the Buddha, such as rolling a boulder down a hill to harm him and smearing poison on his fingernails in an attempt to wound him. However, all his attempts failed, leading to his death and rebirth in hell. Regarding the training of monks, the Buddha adapted his teachings to suit each individual's circumstances, rather than adhering to a rigid method. For example, Venerable Chulapanthaka, despite being given a 4-line verse to memorize, could not retain it for 3 months, constantly forgetting either the beginning or the end. Observing this, the Buddha gave him a method of counting his breaths. Shortly afterward, Chulapanthaka's mind became serene and unwavering, and he attained sainthood. Venerable Nanda, on the other hand, often struggled with thoughts of desire. The Buddha taught different meditation techniques according to each disciple's specific needs. For instance, he instructed Venerable Vangisa, who often felt anxious and worried, to contemplate the white mark at the tip of his nose. The Buddha taught Venerable Puna to observe his breath, whether it was long or short, cool or warm. Within a short period of time, both attained arahantship. The Buddha paid close attention to the progress of his disciples wherever they were. Each day, he would use his divine vision to observe their practices and personally guide them when needed. His spirit of equality was a hallmark of his teachings. The Sangha was composed of members from all strata of society, from the highest classes like royalty, Brahmins, and nobility, to the poorest commoners. All practiced diligently and attained sainthood. Over 45 years, the Buddha and his disciples traveled throughout India, being warmly welcomed everywhere they went, from kings and officials to commoners, from the elderly to young men and women. All were cleansed and refreshed by the light of wisdom and the cool breeze of compassion that the Buddha imparted. Wherever the Buddha was present, false doctrines and external sects retreated and disappeared like morning dew before the sun. The Buddha's teachings, later compiled into scriptures, were divided into 5 periods by later generations. 1. The first period. After attaining enlightenment, the Buddha delivered the Avatamsaka Sutra, elucidating the profound and wondrous nature of ultimate reality and the path to enlightenment. 2. The second period. He taught the Agama Sutras over 12 years, focusing on self-cultivation and personal liberation. 3. The third period. During the Vaipulya period, which lasted 8 years, the Buddha taught that having attained personal liberation, one must also save others, thus raising the level of his disciples' understanding. 4. The fourth period. The Buddha taught the Prajnaparamita Sutras for 17 years, advancing to more sophisticated theories such as the concept of emptiness and the true nature of all phenomena. 5. The fifth period. During the Lotus Sutra and Nirvana Sutra period, which lasted 8 years, the Buddha proclaimed that all his disciples were capable of carrying on the Dharma, and that the reason for his presence in the world was to reveal the Buddha's wisdom, enabling sentient beings to enter into the Buddha's knowledge and vision. He prophesied that 1,250 of his great disciples would attain Buddhahood according to their capacities and conditions, some sooner, some later. The Buddha's teaching career reached its perfect fulfillment. 3 months before his passing, he announced his entry into nirvana, demonstrating the impermanence of the physical body. He emphasized that the body, composed of the 4 elements, earth, water, wind, and fire, will ultimately return to these elements, just as an old cart must eventually wear out. This is the law of impermanence. What remains is the true and unchanging teachings that the Buddha had expounded for 45 years, a complete doctrine that all could follow to achieve liberation from the cycle of birth and death. In his final teaching sutra, the Buddha instructed Venerable Ananda, his attendant, saying, "After I pass into nirvana, rely upon yourselves. Light your own lamps and continue along the path of the true Dharma. Depend on yourselves and not on any other teachings. Attach yourself only to the true Dharma." He continued, "Affection is impermanent. Where there is union, there will be separation. Especially remember that this body is not the self. Life does not last forever. The Buddha entered parinirvana in the Sala Grove of Kushinagar between two sal trees at midnight on the 8th day of the second lunar month in 543 BC. His body was cremated by the people of Kushinagar, his disciples, and the citizens of the Malla kingdom. His relics were then divided into 8 portions to be distributed to 8 different kingdoms, where stupas were built to house them, allowing people to pay homage and make offerings, thereby honoring the wisdom of the Buddha. Venerable Sariputta shared some of the innumerable and wondrous qualities of the Buddha, illustrating his unparalleled wisdom and virtue. The Buddha resided in the Palalian forest of Nalanda with a community of 1,250 monks. At that time, Venerable Shariputra spoke, "While I was alone in my quiet retreat, I contemplated that no Shramana or Brahmin of the past, present, or future, in terms of wisdom, supernatural powers, merit, or spiritual strength, can compare to the Blessed One, let alone surpass him." The Buddha responded, "Shariputra, do you know the mental dispositions of the Buddhas of the past? How do the Buddhas of the present, across the 10 directions, dwell in precepts, dharma, wisdom, liberation, and the state of abiding in liberation?" Shariputra replied, "Blessed One, I do not know the mental dispositions of the Buddhas of the past, present, or future across the 10 directions. I cannot comprehend such matters, so why did I have such a thought? On what grounds did this thought arise? Would the Shramanas and Brahmins believe my words?" Shariputra continued, "Even though I do not know the mental dispositions of the Buddhas of the past, present, or future, I am able to understand the Dharma or teachings of the Tathagata. Blessed One, you have explained to me the nature of cause and effect in the most precise, intricate, and wonderful manner. I have heard and understood that each Dharma is within the ultimate Dharma. Thus, I firmly believe that the Tathagata is a fully enlightened one, adept in distinguishing all Dharmas in the supreme manner." The Blessed One expounded on the unsurpassed teachings, such as the 4 establishments of mindfulness, the 4 right exertions, the 4 bases of supernatural power, the 4 jhanas, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the Noble Eightfold Path. Because of this, the wisdom and supernatural powers of the Blessed One are truly remarkable. None among the Shramanas or Brahmins can match the Blessed One, let alone surpass him. The Blessed One spoke on the supreme teaching of entering the womb. There are 4 types of beings who enter the womb. 1. Those who do not know when they enter the womb, do not know when they dwell in the womb, and do not know when they leave the womb. Most beings belong to this category. 2. Those who know when they enter the womb, but do not know when they dwell in the womb, and do not know when they leave the womb. 3. Those who know when they enter the womb, know when they dwell in the womb, but do not know when they leave the womb. 4. Those who know when they enter the womb, know when they dwell in the womb, and know when they leave the womb. Thus, the insight of the Blessed One is unparalleled. His supernatural powers are unmatched. There is none like him, let alone greater than him. The Blessed One spoke on the supreme teaching of reading others' minds. There are beings who, without thinking, hearing from others, receiving instructions from non-human beings, self-observation, or hearing from someone else, can directly perceive and state that the mind of this person is like this, the mind of that person is like that. Observing in this way is truly accurate. Therefore, this teaching is the highest, with unparalleled insight and miraculous supernatural power. None can match the Blessed One, let alone surpass him. The Blessed One expounded on the supreme teaching of liberation. Due to various causes and conditions, the Blessed One would state that one person attained the stream enterer stage, another attained the once returner stage, another attained the non-returner stage, and yet another attained the arhat stage. Thus, this teaching is supreme, with unparalleled wisdom and miraculous supernatural powers. None can match the Blessed One, let alone surpass him. The Blessed One spoke on the supreme teaching of recollecting past lives. When practitioners enter meditative concentration, they can remember 1 life, 2 lives, 3 lives, 10 lives, 100 lives, 1,000 lives, or countless lives, remembering details such as names, parents, occupations, family, and lifespan. They can recall everything clearly. Thus, This teaching is supreme. None can match the Blessed One, let alone surpass him. The Blessed One spoke on the supreme teaching of the Divine Eye. Practitioners, through the power of meditative concentration, can observe the birth and death of beings according to the karma they have created. Some are born ugly or beautiful. Some are born into suffering or happiness. All these occurrences are due to their bodily actions, speech, and thoughts of good or evil, determining whether they enter favorable or unfavorable conditions. Thus, this teaching is supreme, with unparalleled wisdom and miraculous supernatural powers. None can match the Blessed One, let alone surpass him. Furthermore, the Blessed One spoke on the supreme teaching of the 4 bases of supernatural power. Using skillful means and entering meditative concentration, samadhi, through the power of concentration, one can develop countless supernatural abilities. Such a person can transform a single body into numerous bodies, and then merge those numerous bodies back into one. They can pass through walls, mountains, and rocks without obstruction, walk on water as if on land, walk through the earth as if swimming through water, and move through the air like a bird. This person can emit smoke and water like rain, with flames blazing intensely. Furthermore, they can enlarge their body to reach the heavens of Brahma, and extend their hands to touch the moon and sun. Thus, among all beings, deities and humans, of the past, present, and future, no one can compare to the Blessed One, let alone surpass him. Only the Buddhas of the past, the Buddhas of the present, and the Buddhas of the future in the 10 directions are equal to the Tathagata. The respect of kings, officials, and the common people toward the Buddha is as follows. After the Buddha traveled to Diluli of the Shakya clan, King Pasenadi of Kosala, along with a large entourage, came to visit the Buddha. When the king arrived, he announced his name 3 times, then respectfully knelt down and bowed his head to the Buddha's feet before sitting to one side. At that time, the Buddha asked, "Great king, as the king of Kosala, what do you see or know that makes you humble yourself and respectfully bow at my feet in this manner?" King Pasenadi responded, "I seek the Dharma from the Blessed One, so I offer my respect. I believe that the Tathagata, the perfectly enlightened one, is the one who teaches the complete and perfect path. Blessed One, when I rest on my royal throne in the capital, I see parents and children, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, relatives and kinfolk arguing, speaking ill of one another, and causing harm, even to the point of killing each other over trivial matters. If those who are close to one another behave like this, how much worse must it be for strangers? The suffering is immeasurable. Here, however, I see the disciples of the Blessed One, gathered from all walks of life and from various parts of society, following the Blessed One's teachings, practicing together without disputes or hatred. If there is someone who leaves the path, they do not speak ill of the Buddha, the Dharma, or the Sangha, but instead they blame themselves, saying, "I am evil and lack virtue, as I cannot follow this discipline for life." This is the pure conduct that inspires my respect for the Blessed One. I see some Shramanas and Brahmins from other traditions, having practiced for only 5 or 10 months, who give up their training, become defiled, and are bound by desires. They become ensnared in the sensual pleasures that they themselves despise. Meanwhile, the disciples of the Blessed One voluntarily commit to the path for life. I have never seen any other group living and practicing together as steadily as those under the Blessed One's guidance. This is the pure conduct that inspires my respect for the Blessed One. I see some Shramanas and Brahmins with emaciated and unsightly bodies, covered in scales that no one wants to look at. I wonder whether they are like this due to illness or because of some secret misdeed, making their bodies so gaunt and unsightly. When I inquire, they reply, "Great king, this is due to illness or a natural condition." On the contrary, I see the disciples of the Blessed One eating only 1 meal a day, unattached and unafraid, with calm faces and serene expressions. Their bodies are pure, and their conduct is strict. I think to myself, if it were true that the satisfaction of sensual desires leads to joy and vibrant complexion, I, above all, should have been the first to experience such joy. Yet, this is not the case. This is the pure conduct that inspires my respect for the Blessed One. Moreover, I see some Shramanas and Brahmins of other sects who proclaim their own intelligence, wisdom, and mastery of scriptures. defeating others in debate, boasting of their fame, and easily refuting the views of others. They say, "Let us go and question the Siddhartha Gautama on this or that topic. If he answers, we will question him further, and if he does not, we will leave." They hear that the Blessed One is traveling through certain villages or forests, and they seek to meet him. But upon meeting him, they dare not speak or ask questions. There are a few who dare to ask, and when the Blessed One answers clearly, they feel great joy, bow their heads, and circumambulate him 3 times before leaving. Others, after listening to the Blessed One's teachings, feel elated, prostrate at his feet, and immediately request to take refuge. Buddhism and the teachings of the monastic community often inspire individuals. After hearing the Buddha's teachings, some people feel joyful and enthusiastic, requesting to leave the household life and become a monk. They diligently study and practice the Dharma, and, in this very life, realize the supreme state of holiness, brahmacharya. When such a venerable attains the arahantship, they say, "Before meeting the Blessed One, I was on the verge of ruin and destruction." Why is that? Because before, I was not truly a shramana, monk, yet I called myself a shramana. I was not a true ascetic, yet I pretended to be one. Now I am truly a shramana, truly a practitioner of the holy life. This is the pure conduct that inspires my respect for the Blessed One. Furthermore, I am the ruler of my country. I have the freedom to do whatever I want. Even though I hold such great power, when I preside over the affairs of the state, I do not have the freedom to speak. I might say, "Be silent. No one asked you to speak." Yet no one pays heed. Officials argue and interrupt each other, making it impossible to come to a resolution. However, whenever the Blessed One preaches the Dharma surrounded by a large audience, I have observed people falling asleep and even snoring. When someone beside them gently reminds them, "Do not snore," as the sound disturbs others and the Blessed One does not wish to hear it, that person immediately wakes up, alert and attentive. I think to myself, the Blessed One is truly extraordinary, a master who skillfully guides the great assembly in a marvelous manner. Why? Because the Blessed One does not use weapons or coercion, yet everyone listens and follows his teachings, attaining peace and happiness. This is the pure conduct that inspires my respect for the Blessed One. Moreover, there are high-ranking ministers like Vasakara and Kanthaka, the 2 chief ministers who assist me. I cherish, trust, and provide them with everything they need. But even I cannot command their respect as much as they revere the Blessed One. Once, while traveling with the 4 divisions of my army, I stayed in a village house along with these 2 ministers. I noticed that when they meditated at night, their heads faced the direction where the Blessed One was residing, while their feet pointed toward me. Seeing this, I thought, these 2 ministers do not respect me as much as they respect the Blessed One. This is the pure conduct that inspires my respect for the Blessed One. I am willing to spend my entire life revering, respecting, serving, and offering to the Blessed One because I have the opportunity to be near a perfectly enlightened being who teaches a completely true, virtuous, and incomparable Dharma. The Buddha possesses the 6 great qualities: great strength, great courage, great wisdom, great compassion, great joy, and great equanimity. After 6 years of enduring countless hardships and challenges, the Buddha emerged victorious, surpassing all other champions among humanity. Who else has conquered their own mind and subdued their own desires as he did? It is difficult to conquer others, but conquering oneself is even harder. Therefore, he is worthy of the title Great Hero, Great Strength, Great Compassion. The Buddha renounced everything, not for his own sake, but to sustain sentient beings. Out of love and compassion for humanity, he sought to free all beings from suffering and lead them to happiness by discovering the truth. He is deserving of the titles Great Compassion, Great Joy, and Great Equanimity. The Buddha, like a fragrant lotus rising from the mud, remains untainted by it. He never called himself, nor did he allow others to call him, the savior of the world. Instead, he taught everyone to liberate themselves, as each person has a pure nature. When all defilements are eliminated, only purity remains, which is liberation. Rather than positioning himself as a divine entity that demands submission and fear, the Buddha demonstrated that both humans and deities have the potential to achieve the highest enlightenment. Like the Buddha, through his own effort, he opposed the caste system as it hindered the progress of humanity. The Buddha advocated for equality, criticized the institution of slavery, and condemned outdated customs, such as the slaughter of animals for sacrificial offerings to deities. He advocated for the protection and support of all sentient beings. The Buddha advised everyone not to believe blindly, even if it is a belief passed down by their ancestors, an old custom, a written text, or the words of a great teacher. Instead, one should investigate, contemplate, and verify the truth for oneself. The Buddha taught a pure and true doctrine that was clear, easy to understand, and could be practiced to yield results. Many have followed this path and reached the ultimate truth. The Buddha lived an exemplary and noble life, enduring hardships and difficulties throughout the land of India to guide sentient beings and help them achieve liberation from suffering. His compassion was boundless, and his merit was infinite. Therefore, to repay even a fraction of his grace, what should we do? We should follow the light of the Buddha, his immense sacrifice, boundless compassion, and brilliant wisdom. His life serves not only as a shining example for Buddhists, but also for all people, even those who are not Buddhists. If one considers the Buddha to be a superhuman, he would be a superhuman above all other superhumans in history, deserving of respect, veneration, and admiration from everyone. Disciples should remember his final words. All Buddhists are aware that the Buddha's teachings are precious. But if we do not study and practice them, it would be in vain. He reminded us that everything is subject to dissolution. Only the truth remains unchanging and precious. Thus, be diligent in your efforts to attain liberation.